Thousands of years ago, a woman named Mary was impregnated by God to give birth to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. He performed many miracles, such as walking on water, turning water into wine, and healing those in need. Both his teachings and significant events from that era were documented into a large, sacred text. And then, thousands of years later, an alternative rock band by the name of Manic Street Preachers named an album after it. So Manic Street Preachers were one in a line of countless 90s alternative rock bands that not many people even noticed or took all that seriously at first. They released a single in 1991 called Motown Junk, which gained them enough underground buzz for the band to be picked up by Columbia Records, who would release their first album, Generation Terrace, in 1992. The track Motorcycle Emptiness would become a small-time MTV hit, but the band would quickly fade into obscurity with their second album, Gold Against the Soul, being kind of a flop. It was after this that the group was dropped by Columbia and instead picked up by Epic Records, who gave them the artistic freedom that they needed to release this cult masterpiece right here. Now, when I say the band needed artistic freedom to make this album, you might be thinking if this is going to be some experimental, artsy-fartsy hipster album that you're going to need to sit down with for several hours in order to see it as being anything other than boring and weird. But it's actually quite the opposite. The Holy Bible is by far one of the catchiest albums I've ever listened to, and I can legit remember how every single chorus goes just by looking at the track list, something I could really only say about my absolute favorite albums, but that's another video for another time. From a musical standpoint, the songs on here wouldn't sound out of place on the radio at all. The songs pretty much all go by a conventional structure and are packed with straightforward yet irresistible melodies that'll get you humming, and is backed with the typical instrumental palette of 90s alternative rock. But okay, the album's catchy, big deal. A lot of albums are catchy and happen to be generic or just straight up suck. What makes this album so unique, huh? Well, the lyrics are kinda dark. The band talks about some really mature and dense topics that you don't normally hear spoken on in music like this, like the pro-death penalty anthem that is Archives of Pain, or the vividly descriptive ode to anorexia of 4 State 7 Pounds. I actually have a friend who's kind of an expert on eating disorders, and I showed her the song, and she was pretty impressed by it, so there you go, expert approved. What's crazy about all this though is that unless you have the lyrics pulled up, or are Welsh and can understand James Dean Bradford's voice, you probably wouldn't even pick up on what these songs are about topically. Hell, I didn't even know what these songs were about before I read into the lyrics, so thank you, genius, for existing. This album's lyrics were all written by the band's rhythm guitar player Richie Edwards, and now being on a label where they could do what they wanted, they were able to put out the dark, dense dive into human depravity that they'd seemingly wanted to since the beginning. Unfortunately, Edwards would go missing the following year, never to be found again. The band's next album, Everything Must Go, released a year after his disappearance and featured multiple songwriting credits of his, and is unsurprisingly the only other album in the band's catalog with any kind of significant praise. They've gone on to release 9 more albums since then, but none of them have even come close to having the cult status of this album right here, or even the commercial success of their debut. Not only are the song topics outside of the box, but they're all handled in a way that's very tasteful and carefully worded, yet still dark and despondent, oftentimes sung from the perspective of a different person. The opening track, Yes, for example, is performed through the mind of a prostitute, but is kind of about the lengths that people will go through to get money at large. It's communicated through witty but also pessimistic observations that don't make the song come off as preachy, but rather just a look into the day in the life of this prostitute. While the title of the second track may set it up to be some entry-level social critique of America's most blatant flaws, it's actually a more open-ended song that, as the band words it, compares British imperialism to American consumerism. This song, like pretty much every other on the album, is worded in a way that's cryptic yet readable. It doesn't come across as if Richie is talking down to his audience or preaching some type of ideology, but rather respecting their intelligence and just relaying his thoughts. Going back to the aforementioned 4 State 7 Pounds, I've never heard a song about eating disorders delivered in such a head-on, depressing, yet not patronizing way. The song pretty much goes into graphic detail as to what anorexic people go through on a day-to-day basis, which is a more effective route of raising awareness than a song that might wallow in self-pity. If you don't decide to check out the entire album, then I'd at the very least recommend this one track. I won't go into every single song on the album because I want you to listen to it and decipher some of these song topics for yourself. It's not just me being lazy, I swear. Before I wrap things up though, I do want to give a mention to the last couple songs. The intense humming of Evil, while going by a conventional song structure, doesn't entirely feel like it. It has some noise looping in the background that you'd normally hear in music that's more experimental, but put into an alternative rock context pretty seamlessly. Lyrically, the song kind of feels like an overall synopsis of the record, and highlighting many of humanity's darkest flaws. PCP is not only one of my favorite closing songs period, but probably the best critique of political correctness that I've ever heard. Now, when you're speaking about this topic in any context, it's very, very easy to go horribly wrong, but the Manics don't go about it in a way that makes a mountain out of a molehill and says,
Just get over it. Just get over it, man. What are you whining about? Just get over it.
Rather, they criticize how people getting mad over little discrepancies distracts from much larger issues at hand. Also, naming the song after a drug that makes you immune to pain is just a really funny touch, and adds to the song's chorus as well. Overall, this is an album that I recommend everybody try out, whether to unpack dense lyricism or to just get a bunch of choruses stuck in your head. I also see this album as a good example of not every masterpiece in music having to be experimental or artsy, but can excel in the power of sheer songwriting. I'd seriously argue that this is the most well-written alternative rock album to have ever been made, and one that's infinitely replayable. Definitely give it a listen if you haven't already, and if you enjoyed the video then, well, you know the drill.